My talk is going to play off a little bit of the other things you've heard tonight, but one of the ideas behind the event was recycling the past. And I did a lot of thinking to kind of discover what it was that drove me to do the projects that I'm doing and what drives others that are successful at these types of projects. Before moving on to that, wonder is kind of a theme that I think goes through it. Because the first thing that came to mind was nostalgia. And I think with nostalgia, there's some negative connotations. Trying to go back to a past that can never be recreated. A lot of people in the Valley, we often hear going back to the 50s or going back to when manufacturing was here. And those days, unfortunately, are not coming back because the economy has changed. Those things have moved to other places. But I think wonder and whimsy, I think, are important. Bringing people to the area and getting them excited about the things that we're doing and the potential of the area, I think that's really the key of what we need to accomplish. So taking that as a starting point, I tried to figure out what it was that drove me to take on the projects instead of just kind of sitting on the sideline and talking about it or not taking action. And I found a few interesting parallels with some of the other speakers that I think you'll see in my talk. So one of the first things that I thought about was family. My family are both sides of my family are immigrants. My mother's family is from Turkey. She came over here when she was 26, and they're Muslim. And you can probably see from the picture, they look very ethnic. And I think in our really divisive world today, I think it's important to remember how much immigrants contribute, and from all walks of life. My father's family, and this is my father here on the right, is Polish. And my grandparents had come over in the early 1900s. So it's really, like many of us, an immigrant story. So I think often of this area, being first generation myself, that it's not history that ties me to this area, but I feel very passionate and very strong about it. So that's another one of these things that I'm trying to get to the root of. This is the house that I grew up in Italianate, Fort Plain, New York, and it has a lot of nice historical qualities. Like many of our communities, we have a lot of these homes around, and often they're underappreciated, undercared for, and they're abundant, so I think we tend to take them for granted. Here's a little shot of the downtown of Fort Plain and the street that I grew up on. And for me, this was kind of my first sense of taking in this history, going to places like Phoenix or some cities out west, Las Vegas. And I often am saddened and you feel a bit drained by how uniform everything is, how consistent, how many tract houses or whatever. And I think this is really one of the assets that our region has that differentiates us from so much of the rest of the country. Here's a shot, you saw some shots earlier of Gloversville. This is downtown Fort Plain, 19-teens. You can see all the activity. It's not something we really see these days. And that's something that I think a lot of our efforts attempt to recapture, is to get that critical mass, to get people out. Now, interestingly, this is from 1895, and this is the cornerstone laying for a building that we eventually purchased, which we'll get to later. But it just shows you, this is a town not quite as small as some of the ones we've discussed, but of about 2,000 people. And to see on what was a rainy day, how many people came out for a cornerstone laying for a new building and the excitement, enthusiasm about their community. And I think that that's something really important. So then I got this Leader Herald article about the Universalist Church in Fort Plain. It had sold, this is a 16,000 square foot church, had sold for $508 at a tax foreclosure auction, and the gentleman that bought it was going to dismantle it and sell it all to people out of state and just to make a profit and then walk away from it. And it just broke my heart, and all of a sudden I was like, somebody's got to do something about this. So I started calling people and telling them, you got to do something about this. And I said, you got to, the local, there was a little preservation group and, other things like that. And I said, this is wrong, this is terrible, this can't happen. So this is a shot of the building, 2011. And, I would get home 2 or 3 times a year for holidays. And I lived down the street, so I would always see it. And then I started seeing it in a new way because I was imagining if it wasn't there anymore. And it's just to me, it's such a handsome building, and it just really broke my heart. This was the condition of the building at the time. Some of the things you see, mold, one of the floors had collapsed. That's where that stairway was that you saw before. There were about 300 pigeons living in the thing. A lot of them, had died, and it was just a real mess. The ceilings had come down, and it was bought, it had gone, prior to this $508 sale, it had gone into foreclosure with the foreclosure crisis. A company in New Jersey had speculated on it. So it was a real mess. But I knew we had to do something about it. So we started a petition. And we started a Facebook page, and we got likes and different things like that. And I realized that likes don't get you very far. I took out $30,000 from my retirement fund, and I bought the church. So this slide represents the time I would wake up for the next 6 months in terror because I didn't know what I had just done. Because we saved the building from getting torn down, but I'm sure any of you that have ever taken on a project like this know this feeling. And I'm sure with the American Hotel and others, it's terrifying, but it's exhilarating at the same time, because you just tap into this energy that you're doing something that's so important and then, has the potential to really drive a lot of other actions. Now, I have a good friend that lived in Sharon Springs for many years, my friend Chad. And through him, I knew the cafe and later the American Hotel, and met the Beekman boys. And I actually bumped into them in New York and got talking, and, oh, you guys know Sharon Springs? I'm from Fort Plain. And totally outside of this conversation of preservation. But, what we need is people that are doers and people that are willing to take action and be able to make these changes and figure out how you can find your trigger. It might not be a building, it might not be, a hotel, but it might be a farmhouse or a car or something, but there's something that maybe you're passionate about that can help your community and give back to your community. So these are, just some inspirations. We started out with some ideas to make money, because the lottery wasn't really working out for me. So we came up with products, and this is often the thing you hear. We did T-shirts, we did pint glasses, and we figured out, how to become marketers, how to do different things. And I realized we were learning all these skills that would really make us entrepreneurs. But one of the frustrations is oftentimes you're doing these things, and you're learning how to fix up buildings, which is another common thread, and there isn't really a recognition for that. And I think this is really a shortcoming for many of our communities, because what happens is we weren't seen as a business. We were seen as a bunch of do-gooders that just had some silly idea, and it's hard to really capture the magnificence of the space that we have. But what would happen a lot, and part of the reason I included Sharon Springs here, is, and backing up a little, when I was in college, I was a documenter as opposed to a doer. I was into photography. My father had gotten me a camera. So I spent a lot of my weekends in Sharon Springs, kind of sneaking around in some of the old hotels, documenting the beautiful spaces and things like that. But I had saw the depths of, after the arsons and fires that they had seen, how terrible things were in like 93, 94. It was pretty rough there. And so I always found it comical that the first thing that would happen when people would walk into our building, there would be two actions. The first is they'd say, "Holy crap, you have a lot of work to do. This is really daunting." And the other would be, "This isn't Sharon Springs. This isn't, Saratoga," because by this point, this was 2011, and they were well on their way. And I had seen it when it was worse than we were in. And so what happens is people have this reaction, I think, of, this is just too daunting. And it's hard to imagine some of these projects, but I think what it comes down to is if you just give in to that, that feeling that you're going to succeed, you keep putting one foot in front of the other, you'll get there, and here you see some of the actions we were taking. We had donated equipment, that's a piano up there, we're painting, fixing holes in the floor, doing all kinds of work. So 2 years later, we started having concerts, we started having dance events, we had a garden down another building behind the church, and we're putting in a park, so things are really starting to happen, but all in little steps. You get somebody in to fix a door or paint a wall or whatever, but it's all in little steps. It wasn't some big, huge leap. And here you see kind of getting to that wonder stage again, after that period where, okay, you can sleep through the night and not, be terrified, you start realizing you can fulfill some of your dreams. I love music, and this is another kind of intersection where, now we have this beautiful building, beautiful acoustics, and I can pick up the phone and say, here's Mike Doty, a musician from Soul Coughing, who I always loved. Hey, you want to come and do a show? Sure. He came and played a show for 115 people from all across New York State, Western Massachusetts. So, those things are possible. We got some other really wonderful musicians to come in, and we pay them. And we charge tickets, but it works out. Now, a funny thing that one of our early supporters, Joe Mello, who is he does business plans, he told us. He said, this isn't going to be easy. And he said, you're going to be the janitor some days. Some days you're going to be the bookkeeper. Some days you're going to be the repairman. So this is not, to gloss over, the difficulties of it. But I think what's exciting in character building is that you do learn how to deal with these things, and it doesn't necessarily cost you a lot of. But I wanted to add, you do need money. So it's also because you do see a lot of people that come in with $1 and a dream, or as they sometimes call them in the real estate world, $20,000 millionaires. They'll buy a building, they'll think it's just going to fall into place, and it's going to be super easy. And what that does is that can perpetuate the blight that we often see and is very challenging. So you do have to be realistic, and volunteer labor will only get you so far. I believe in hiring people that are challenged, that maybe have trouble in the past getting jobs, have skill deficits, and getting them so that they can contribute to the community, and it's a win-win, as many of the things we've seen tonight will show you. In one of the earlier pictures from the community center, you'll have seen these chairs in the background. We've been recovering, this is a little feel-good piece, because we've been recovering a lot of the items that were dispersed after the church went into foreclosure, so I thought this was a funny slide. But the exciting thing is that through doing these events and doing things that give back to our community, we got a lot of attention. And what that enabled us to do, our name is the Mohawk Valley Collective, so they were playing on that, is to do other things and to help other groups. So in Kenajahari, the neighboring village, we were able to help the county solve a problem with an old school there, the West Hill School. And we helped that group, and now we've joined forces, and that's another project that we're working on towards making a brewery in that building. And then the county's saying, well, you guys have really been doing some interesting things. You're thinking outside of the box. So we helped initiate the discussions to reuse the Beech Nut facility in Kenajahari instead of just simply tearing it down. Because what happens in a lot of these situations is we have so much investment, both finances and also community investment. These are facilities that generations of families have worked in, toiled in, and have been a part of the community. And rather than wipe them off the face of the earth, if we can find ways to reinvest and make them take on a second life, I think it's better for everyone. And then the final piece of this is we were able to take our local efforts and transform it into, if you see that pink area, what's called a land bank, which does much of what the MBC was doing on a small scale to a regional basis. We cover about 10% of the state, and just last year alone, we got about $2 million in funding from the foreclosure crisis to do other projects. So it's kind of like what we saw with Chicago, where we're really trying to make other incubators and kind of spread this throughout the region. And just wanted to say thank you for inviting me to speak.